Story 1. She woke up at 5:55, had an urge to iron, and put the iron on before it was hot. She woke up Dad in a chirpy, sing-song voice. Dad got the car in his pajamas and dressing gown. He had to borrow his boss's car, a 1961 Volkswagen Beetle, as his 1958 FC Holden wagon was being tuned to ensure it would run smoothly to get Mum to the hospital. It was not easy getting her into the seat of the Volkswagen, which Dad described as trying to stuff a family loaf of bread into a brown paper sandwich bag. They got to the hospital around the corner at 6:15. Mum's water spilled all over, soiled Dad's boss's Volkswagen, and I was born at 6:20. It was a good thing the Volkswagen had all rubber mats. Mum said she was high on adrenaline at the time and upset with me that in my haste to come down the chute, I broke her coccyx, and that I was a pain ever since. That said, she did say she loved me, but when she first saw me, she exclaimed, "Oh, Henry," saying I looked exactly like my morbidly obese, completely bald paternal grandfather. A nurse observed that I looked like a cute little Buddha, which became one of my neonatal nicknames. Little Buddha. Little Buddha when I was nice, bum breaker when I was not. Story 2. My mom gave birth to me in a hospital in the 1950s when mothers were given anesthesia and woke up with a baby handed to them. She had very little to say about how I was born because she wasn't awake to experience it. Story 3. I was born breech, which means I came out feet first after it was too late for a cesarean section. She said it was a good thing I weighed only 5 pounds because breech births apparently cause more pain. She had 3 children, and all her labors lasted only 2 hours. Story 4. A home birth with a midwife present and a doctor on call was common at the time where I live. Her experience was good because traditional midwives knew what they were doing. Story 5. 36 hours of labor. We were both critically ill, no idea why. My father was asked who he wanted prioritized, and he chose her. She remembers nothing else until I was 2 days old and she finally met me. Story 6. She said the people who claim they forgot about the pain afterward were not truthful, but that it was worth the result. Story 7. I do not know the details, but I was a chubby baby who was born around dinner time. She told me that I was probably hungry, and I was. Story 8. At the hospital, I was a bit late coming out, so they induced me. Labor took a while and was pretty difficult. Always late, that's me. But my mom always claimed that the second she held me, she knew that every minute of struggle was worth it. She was a very sweet person, obviously. Story 9. In 1975, no pain medications were given. She just passed out. Her tubes were tied after she had me. 14 months later, my sibling was born. Story 10. My mom told me the story only after I was an adult and asked her. It was a shoulder dystocia, and she had to have an episiotomy and vacuum assistance to deliver me. She had an epidural, but still, it was difficult. Even as horrible as that sounds, she still chose to have more children after me. That is the true miracle of birth. Story 11. My mother gave birth to me at home in the 1980s with no medical professionals present except my father and grandmother. She said it was an amazing experience. I have been exceeding expectations ever since. Story 12. I was scheduled for a cesarean section due to gestational diabetes. She never told me too much, but she did mention she was drugged up, but awake. She would always say how she was upset that my dad's head was floating around the operating room. My sister was born 16 months later as a vaginal birth after cesarean. She was a surprise, but I am so glad to have had a sibling so close in age to grow up with. Story 13. Apparently, I was the easiest. I am also the oldest, which is not usually how it goes, but I was a normal, healthy baby. My one sister was positioned sideways, so they shook her around and pushed her, trying to turn the baby. She was also 2 weeks late. My youngest sister was delivered by emergency cesarean section at 7.5 months. Both almost died due to hemorrhaging blood. The nurse asked my mother during this if she wanted to name the baby just in case. That was the last baby. She told us it is okay not to want children and that it is a choice, not a task to complete. Story 14. The doctor almost dropped me because he or she insulted my mom by saying she didn't know how to push. She thought, This is my third baby. I'll show them. And I shot out of her so fast. Thankfully, the doctor caught me by the ankle. Then she almost bled to death and was gaslit about how much blood she was losing. She reminded the nurses again that it wasn't her first experience. She was familiar with how much her body loses after birth. I was healthy, though, and apparently started lifting my head up in the bassinet the same day. Story 15. I was supposed to have a hospital delivery. However, my grandmother, my mother's former mother-in-law, was visiting that day, so my mother pretended she was not going into labor until she left, then called emergency services. I was born in the ambulance on the side of the road. She likes to tell me about the man in the back of the ambulance trying to calm her down and telling her that he had delivered many babies over the years. She later found out that he was actually talking about cows. She also likes to talk about how we still managed to arrive at the hospital before the doctor, and they tried to charge her for the delivery. Story 16. Awful. As a baby, I weighed almost 10 pounds, was born with a full head of hair, completely yellow from jaundice, and my body was covered in eczema. I was not breathing at birth, so they had to put me in an oxygen tank. They thought I would die from the beginning, and it took a few weeks to realize I was going to survive. She always told me that after having me, she would never consider having another child because of that experience and had her tubes tied shortly after. Story 17. A great experience. No issues or complications. She said her epidural worked so well that she did not feel a single thing, not even pressure. They had to literally tell her when to push. I was a small 6-pound baby as well. Meanwhile, I had 2 babies. For my first baby, my epidural did not work, and my second baby came too fast for an epidural. I experienced various complications. I was very jealous. Story 18. The experience was traumatic, and I came out more disabled than she expected. I am blamed 40 years later for her expensive medical bills. She and I never had a bond. Story 19. I am the second child for my mother's 4th pregnancy. I believe she had a couple of miscarriages before my sister was born, followed by me. Both my sister and I were born after inductions, each occurring 2 weeks past the due date. My sister's birth was fairly simple but long after being induced. She received pethidine and recommended it to me during my first pregnancy, saying it was a great alternative to an epidural. She mentioned that with me, the birth was so quick they broke her waters, and I came out on a contraction. My first pregnancy delivered at 37 weeks. I received pethidine, and my waters broke naturally. My son was born 11 hours later, and I was warned that the next birth would be quick. Story 20. I was a premature baby, born 1 month and 6 days early. The midwife my mom had was helping someone else give birth at the time I was being born, so a doctor delivered me. He did not know what he was doing, from what I was told. Because I was born early, I had a condition since my lungs were not ready. I stayed in the hospital for a month and came home on the day I was supposed to be born. Story 21. A failed cesarean section. The doctor couldn't be bothered to get out of bed. We only survived because I was born a month early. Any bigger and I would not have fit through her hip gap. I am an only child thanks to that. She was traumatized and developed severe postpartum depression. I only know this because my father told me. My mother denies it. She has had mobility issues to this day despite rehabilitation and daily exercises. They didn't even give her any medication since she was considered too far along. A real horror show. The other doctor reprimanded the nurses and midwives when he came in on his shift. The birth of my twins went better. Still mildly traumatic, as I was delivered by cesarean section early due to failing health and hospitalization days prior, and I was not mentally prepared to have it done without my planned doctor. However, the surgeon who performed the procedure did good work. At least the scarring seems to be minimal. We will see how I am in 2 years. Story 22. I'm a mother. With my first, I had a natural birth using just gas and air, and with my second, I had a water birth with no medication. Both were incredible experiences. If I were to have a third, I would definitely do it the same way I had my second. The pain was intense, but it was temporary, and I do not like the idea of an epidural. Story 23. The only thing I know about my birth is that I was supposed to be born the opposite sex with dwarfism and Down syndrome. Story 24. My mother intended to have a natural birth but had to undergo an emergency cesarean section and died on the operating table. They were able to resuscitate her, thankfully, but she said she was terrified. Story 25. I have one of the qualities required to kill Macbeth. The reason I have it is that I arrived 3 weeks late, and even though I was induced, they had to come in after me. 9 pounds 7 ounces. Story 26. Traumatic. She 18 almost died. I am not sure if she ever said the cause, but she stayed in the hospital for several days. I was released to my dad and grandparents in 1974. Both of my birth experiences were very traumatic as well. It is in the blood, I guess. Story 27. Cesarean section due to high-risk pregnancy. Her first child was born when she was already 34 years old. She said she was in labor for 2 days with the firstborn because they wanted to choose the normal birthing method. Her cervix did not cooperate, so she had to give birth by cesarean section. P.S. Sorry, Mom. Story 28. I was a severely premature baby and weighed only 900 grams. My mother said pushing me out felt like nothing, especially compared to her 3 previous babies. Story 29. She was due in mid-March, got sick in mid-February, and they were worried about her blood pressure, so they induced her. I refused to come, so after 24 hours in the hospital, they sent her home. She got home and got on the phone to order dinner, and her water broke while she was on the phone. She finished the order, somehow knowing she was never going to pick it up. Then she went to the hospital. I came about 11 hours later, very early in the morning, 29 days before my due date. Story 30. Me. Mom was induced at 9 days late, had 3 days of labor on and off, and it ended with a cesarean section at the beginning of day 3 because her pelvis was too narrow for me to fit through. Sibling. Planned cesarean section, in and out in less than 30 minutes, drama-free. Story 31. My brother and I were both born in the same hospital. She had me very quickly and easily. My brother, on the other hand, caused my mom significant tearing. Her contractions were not strong enough, so she was given Pitocin to help, which made it very painful. She was also stitched by an intern and given the husband stitch either knowingly or by accident, we do not know. She had to undergo another surgery to fix that, but she never fully recovered. Story 32. My mother is a midwife and gave birth to me at her hospital. The atmosphere among coworkers was very good at the time, and her labor room became a second break room during the first few hours of her labor. Everything went as usual until it was time for the actual delivery. During the delivery of my sibling, the coworker who was her midwife told my mother to push harder after the first couple of pushes. Since she wanted to do it without needing this reminder, she pushed with all her strength from the start. This unfortunately caused my birth to happen a bit too quickly. Although the consequences lasted only my first couple of days, it is something that is rarely seen. My case is still used as an example when patients ask whether it is normal for delivery to take as long as it often does. While deliveries can be painful, exhausting, and tedious, nature designed them to be an endurance race rather than a sprint for a reason. Story 33. My mom barely made it to the hospital in time. I was a month early and came out in 45 minutes. The doctor arrived with 5 minutes to spare. I weighed just under 5 pounds. My mom says that after a 20-hour labor with my 9-pound brother, I was easy. That was probably the only time in my life I was easy. Story 34. Cesarean section, both times. Very traumatic. I was born when my mother was 6.5 months pregnant, and I was stillborn. There were a lot of tensions. Even before my birth, my paternal family was deeply patriarchal. They did not respect my mother and were barely helpful during her pregnancy. We live in a joint family, so every chore fell on my mother, from making tea for her same-aged and spoiled sister-in-law to locking the doors at night. She was responsible for everything, including cooking, serving food, and taking care of frequent guests. She was also studying at the time. Keep in mind, the family consisted of 6 people plus guests. My mother had her sister stay with her to help. On the morning of my birth, tensions rose sharply. My mother woke up suddenly, disturbing the baby because of a nightmare. Some guests left before she could offer them breakfast, so her sister-in-law threw a tantrum about how my mother could not do anything right. My mother was bathing and was not told the guests were leaving. Her sister was busy cleaning the house, while the sister-in-law was free snacking. The sister-in-law and mother-in-law fought with my mother and blamed her sister, causing a lot of stress. My mother argued with her sister about how she should not tolerate all of it, but her sister stood firm. They are very close. The in-laws yelled at my mother for hours. The pregnancy was already complicated, and my mother was severely underweight. By evening, she experienced sharp, strong abdominal pain, and her water broke. It was storming heavily, and only my mother and her sister were at home. Back then, phones were rare and we did not own a car. They had to travel 2 hours in a broken cab on a road full of potholes. The next birth was my siblings. The in-laws suggested my mother find out the baby's gender beforehand because they did not want a girl. She refused to know and refused abortion. While in labor, the mother-in-law suggested a normal delivery, but the doctor insisted a cesarean section was necessary and an emergency. The mother-in-law argued while my mother was in pain. In the end, the mother-in-law was asked to leave, and a cesarean section was performed. Story 35. I was 2 weeks late, so my mother had her labor induced by a doctor at a hospital in 1983. After about a day in labor without much progress, she had a cesarean section. She had a good recovery and really liked her male doctor. Story 36. I was the second born, and Dad would not take her to the hospital 26 miles away until he had his full breakfast of pancakes, bacon, and eggs, as he figured it would be a long, hard 2 days of labor like their first. They got to the hospital around noon, and nurses did all the preparation work for babies in the 1940s. Shaving, enema, and stockings to cover the legs for a more sterile entrance. Mom and Dad were left alone in the room for her labor. Mom started yelling, "It's coming, it's coming." Dad peeked under the gown and said, "It has a full head of black hair," and Mom kept yelling. The nurse said, No, you have lots of time left," but grudgingly looked under the blanket and saw my head was out. Mom was hustled to the delivery room so the doctor could collect his fee, and he caught me. There was no time for any drugs to be administered. I weighed 9.5 pounds, and Mom said, "You were so alert and just looked around at everyone." My sister, born with lots of drugs in her system, came out blue and did not breathe for 3 minutes. Story 37. She went to an appointment. My grandmother took her, and for some reason the doctor said I was going to be born that day. It was difficult. I had to be vacuumed out, and the doctors apparently manipulated her stomach to get me out. She has held it against me ever since. Story 38. Mum had my sister alone at home on the kitchen floor. She said it took 15 minutes and was all over by the time anyone arrived. Wild. Story 39. Cesarean sections were performed on me and my brother. Apparently, when they delivered my brother, the surgeon performed poorly, so she decided not to have any more children after that. Story 40. 2 quick and intervention-free births. She started laboring at home during the night, then went to the hospital early in the morning, only a couple of hours before both my brother and I were born. She has always said to make sure you move around during labor and not lie down on the bed the whole time. I am really grateful for her positive birth experiences, as they helped shape my views on childbirth. I had my first son at home 2 months ago, and the birth was similar in length and free of interventions. Story 41. My mom had issues with preeclampsia. Apparently, her blood pressure went from 115 to over 170. She gained a lot of weight and was on the shorter side. I was born weighing less than 7 pounds. She was upset at the time but jokes about it now. My mom's blood pressure was so high that my sister remembers sitting in the doctor's office waiting for my mom to get clearance to leave after laying down during her appointments. I think I took a long time to be born as well. My older sister came out easily for some reason. When my sister had her children, the first was easy with no issues. The second pregnancy involved severe preeclampsia, gestational problems, and another complication. She almost bled out on the table, and the doctor said she was lucky to be alive. She had an emergency cesarean section, and the baby was born a month early. Both children are healthy now, thankfully. Story 42, cesarean section for me and, because of me, my two siblings. She said to me, "I wish you were not so fat when you were born." Story 43, in 1956, she had a cesarean section. Her abdomen was filled with blood, which she said they scooped out with a soup ladle. She almost died. She would remind me as necessary. Story 44. My mom said I tore her down to her anus, and my dad jokingly asked the doctor to put in a few more stitches when he sewed her up. She also developed diabetes during pregnancy that never went away and lost all her teeth. Growing up, she always wore false teeth. Story 45. It was traumatic and lonely, and she tore. I have seen pictures of it, and it was a bloody mess. She terrified me about the whole experience, which definitely impacted my plan when I was pregnant. My birth experience was objectively worse than hers, but I did postpartum therapy, and I am fine now. Story 46. My mom said she had heart palpitations, but they occurred frequently, so she went to the hospital. I was born 10 minutes after she arrived, 6 weeks premature, in 1974. Story 47, natural, and mine was the worst. I was born during a financial crisis, in the middle of the night, with riots and fires all over the road. Story 48. My mother was living overseas in Thailand in 1969 when she gave birth to my sister. It was an adventure. Pain management was minimal. Story 49. Natural birth. She died after I got tangled in the umbilical cord. She had heavy bleeding and a few other complications. But my dad is the best father anyone could ask for, and my mom's sisters, of course, have been there for us. I am turning 37 in a couple of weeks. Apparently, all my mom, Michelle, was saying was, "Is he okay? Is he okay?" I never got to meet her, but if she is anything like her sisters, she would have said something like, "Bloody hell, can someone get this thing out of me? It's time to feed the chooks. Love you, Mum." Story 50. Unmedicated birth. She said it had something to do with her gestational diabetes, like my little body was trying to make up for her lack of insulin, and drugs would put me in a precarious position. I've never heard of that last part, but maybe it was what they thought in the 1980s. I don't know. Anyway, she was unmedicated. She said it was the worst pain in her life, but the easiest to forget. She also said I had a planet head. I was also a vaginal birth after cesarean. With my sister in the 1970s, Mom had a bad time. Sister got stuck. Mom had a horrible cesarean experience, and she got an infection that sounded like it was the hospital's fault. She didn't want to go through that again, and it was 15 years between me and my sister, so she went with the vaginal birth after cesarean. Now my daughter also got herself a little stuck, and I also had to get a cesarean after trying vaginal, so my mother and I had that in common, I guess. Big-headed babies that didn't want to come out. Story 51. It was 1969, and my mother was 18. There was a group of children smoking marijuana under a tree. The window was open, so the nurse told her to breathe deeply. That was probably around the time she was given medication because that is the last thing she remembers. Story 52. My mother had the 5 of us in the mid-1950s to early 1960s. There were many medications involved and very little memory of our actual births. 30 years later, she declared that getting her ears pierced was more painful. Story 53. I'm the second child, so my mom did some light cleaning and then hopped in the shower. She realized I was crowning. We got to the hospital, but the doctor could not be reached because he was at his child's soccer game. Another doctor was going to meet us at delivery. I was born in an elevator on the way to the maternity ward, and my dad caught me. Story 54. I was a planned cesarean section, so yes, a cesarean section is invasive, but it meant they were not scrambling to get out the door or anything. My brother was also born by cesarean section, but his was not planned. My mother labored for hours, and they determined his head was just too big. Story 55. Cesarean section. She said the doctor took her organs out and placed them on the table next to her. I do not know what that means. Story 56. My mother had a natural birth with me and an epidural with my brother. She had me in the hospital room with my brother. She described it as similar to having a massive bowel movement. Story 57. I was Frank Breach, delivered naturally in 1973. She broke her coccyx on the way out. There is a reason my brother is 5 years younger than me. Story 58. My mum was already upset with me. Both brothers were 3 weeks early, and I was 2 weeks late, so she was pregnant with me for an extra 5 weeks. She had an appointment to be induced at 7:30 in the morning. She went into labor at 4 a.m. that day, and I was born by myself at 7:28. I was the third child, so she said it was quick and easy despite me being the biggest at 9 pounds 9 ounces. Story 59. My mom had a calm and unmedicated birth experience. She said she barely felt any pain, but the woman next to her drove her insane because that woman kept screaming to be killed during every contraction. I am glad my mom had a calm and non-traumatizing birth experience. However, as a result, she believes every woman should experience vaginal birth if there is no medical reason for cesarean section. She says cesarean section is the easy way out. It makes me angry because she clearly lacks awareness that birth can be a traumatizing experience for many women. Story 60. 2 weeks overdue. My twin sister was 6 pounds 9 ounces, face down, head first. I was delivered 10 minutes later, 7 pounds 2 ounces, feet first. Our doctor was old school English and the only one who agreed to deliver us without a cesarean section. She always talked about it like it was no big deal. Story 61. My mom had a cesarean section. She was unconscious for 2 days and lost a lot of blood, so she had to receive a blood transfusion. It was a premature birth at 7 months, so she was not prepared at all. She said she never wants to go through that again, and it is understandable. Story 62. I almost took us both down. There are many details she has chosen to take to her grave. I know I got stuck, was pulled out, blood everywhere, spent 2 days in the emergency room, and finally got home safely. Now I am diagnosed with autism and have a blind eye. So yes, it went great. It went so great that she chose to have 2 more children, my dear siblings who had safe and normal births. Story 63. My mom had 2 cesarean sections. She was highly active before and after, so she said her recovery was not that bad. Story 64. My mother told me it was too cold in the room. She says that dad realized she was in labor before she did. My older sister was induced, so mom did not know what spontaneous onset was supposed to feel like. The doctors were asking silly questions like, do you want it to be a boy or a girl? This was before it was common to know beforehand. She also complained about the negative attitude of her roommate in the recovery ward. She reports that when the sun came up and she saw what a beautiful day it was, she briefly debated trying to make it home in time for the neighbor's birthday party she was supposed to attend that day. A nurse had to point out that I was barely 4 hours old and would not be ready to party at any point that day. Mom got hit hard with the happiness chemicals, the rush of being up all night, and sort of forgot the logistics. Story 65. My mother said my older brother took a while to be born. When I was born, I came out after a few hours. For my brother's birth, her mother, older brother, and his wife, her only family we were ever in contact with, were there. For mine, she was alone. My grandmother, my father's mother, stayed with my older brother and offered to call my father's work. But my mother had a motive. My father was insisting on whether I was a girl, giving me a ridiculous name. He wanted to purposely give me a horrible name that would get me bullied. For example, since our last name was Bay, he demanded my first and middle names be March April Bay. If I were a boy, he wanted a nice, normal name. He informed my mother that was what my name was going to be, and she hoped I would be born and named before he got to the hospital. She won. I was born a few hours before my father arrived, and he signed the certificate with my nice, normal name that was already on it. Story 66. She said she had to have a cesarean section because she couldn't dilate fully. The umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck, almost causing suffocation. Ironically, I am now no contact with my mother because she was emotionally unavailable. Her manipulation of me for years led to severe depression and suicidal thoughts. Story 67. Premature birth. My mother was nervous and then ecstatic. It took 2 months for me to officially go home to my still brand new parents. Story 68. Emergency cesarean section. Not only was I already 2 weeks late, this was the 1980s, and they do not let you go that long past your due date anymore, but I was not in the right position. She was in labor for 13 hours but stopped dilating. I guess I must have been showing signs of distress because they ended up performing the cesarean section. She said she did not feel anything, only some pulling and tugging. My dad, who watched, said he saw me in the amniotic sac and that I was blinking my eyes. They held me up next to my mom. She was not able to hold me right away, and she said she was in pain the following days, particularly when she had to stand and walk around. The nurses told her I was the cutest baby in the nursery. My mom said my head was perfectly round. She held me on the way home and said she was back in her jeans a week later. Story 69. She told me it was painful, but the pain was forgotten as soon as I was out. Labor lasted only 1 hour. She said it was easy, like when you pop a boiled almond out of its skin. Or maybe she said that to make it seem easy so she could have grandchildren. In any case, it did not work. Story 70. I was born around midday, if I remember correctly. Labor had been going on since the early morning. Apparently, I had been lying in the correct position for a while before I came out. So my nose was a bit smushed in and my eyes were slanted. Paired with being a bit yellow in skin tone, my mom and dad laughed because I looked Asian. My grandma was offended on my behalf. Story 71. It was a high-risk pregnancy because of my mother's various illnesses. She was in the hospital most of the time, and my father visited her daily. At 5 months, she had a heart attack, and the doctor decided they had to perform a cesarean section. Luckily, they gave my mother medication to help me develop faster, but I still had to be in an incubator for a while. My parents said they were very happy when I started breathing on my own, and they visited me in the neonatal intensive care unit every day. Both my mother and I made it through this without any complications. Story 72. I was conceived after a failed tubal ligation. Then my mother fell at 6 months and went into labor. They were able to stop it. She also had gestational diabetes with me. I was born a month late, and they only delivered me because I was losing weight and my mother insisted. She had some bleeding problems and a cancerous growth was found. Because she hemorrhaged, they performed surgery to give her a complete hysterectomy. However, the anesthesiologist administered anesthesia based on her pregnant weight, not her actual weight at the time, which was about 30 pounds different. This caused her to die on the table, but they were able to revive her. Due to the cancer and the surgery, I was raised by my grandmother and grandfather for the first couple of months. From what my mother said, her parents wanted to adopt me. Those were crazy times. Story 73. My older sister's birth was great for my mother, but mine was not so much. They knew of birth defects in the womb, and during delivery, my heart kept having decelerations, so they had to perform an emergency cesarean section. When they told my father this, he looked like he was going to pass out, so they did not allow him to go. I was a large baby, so it was probably better that she had a cesarean section, but she still has the scar. I am in my 20s. Story 74. I never asked my mother about this. It seems too personal. Yes, I know it is my own birth, but it was her experience in different times. Story 75. My mother was 40 when she had me in the late 1950s during the baby boom. She said she followed the nurses who were talking about the old lady who had a baby because she wanted to see it too. She also said she scrubbed the bathroom floor in the hospital. When she took me home, she had to cook a turkey dinner for 26 people. She had 2 more children. Story 76. It was horrific. Her waters broke at 3 months, and nobody believed her. I was 3 weeks late and in a frank breech position. When I finally was born, I had left half of my skin inside her. Story 77. My mom explained she had all 5 biological children the old-fashioned way, vaginally. My oldest sister was an adoptee, so my military brother was the actual firstborn. She was about 22 when she had him, around 1971. She even declined the offer of a cesarean section when she had my biological eldest sister despite being overdue. This was in 1975. She had the rest of us in 1976, 1982, and 1986 respectively, with me being the youngest. Doctors were worried because when she was pregnant with me, she was already around 38. It was almost unheard of for a woman in her late 30s to be pregnant at that time. Aside from autism, I ended up fine after birth. Irish or Swedish women can be tough. She pretty much felt that she might as well get it over with. My biological sister, however, had to have cesarean sections for her firstborn daughter because she was too big for a normal birth, which she did try. When the sister had her twin daughters, she had to have another cesarean section because one twin was bigger than the other. My xennial sister and adopted sister had their kids the old-fashioned way. Most of my cousins on my dad's side of the family opted for the old-fashioned method regardless of health conditions. One even had triplets. I was told that if I was ever going to be a mother, I would likely have a cesarean section due to a history of health issues not related to autism. Irish, Swedish, or Latino women do not take childbirth lightly. Story 78. My mom was 16 with her first child and 17 with me. They treated her roughly and made her births a punishment. They delayed pain intervention until she could no longer receive it. With my birth, she had 72 hours of hard labor, and they risked my life to show that the second time was worse. I ended up with a cut and a permanent scar across my nose from the forceps, and they pulled the uterus out of her body when forcing me out. It is strange that she did not have another child after me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.